Hello.
So, today's episode, we're going to cover off something that's been covered in the media, I think, with the specific example of Airbnb shifting a very significant amount of budget away from performance-based into brand building.
What? Just at that point, what's the justification behind it that they're going out to press with? Like, how are they framing it?
Exactly that. The piece that I read was basically a business-wide decision to move what was a heavy reliance on performance marketing into brand and owning their space a little bit more.
Yeah.
By building the brand, getting an affinity, building an audience.
Yeah.
And I think they made that move about 2 years ago, and now the change and the efficacy of that shift is being realised, and it's massive.
It was an interesting move, and it caused ripples, I would say, within, well, we're talking about it 2 years later. Their brand activity is front and centre. I see, well, I'm talking above the line now, but I see their TV ads, connected TV as well, all over the shop. You'd like to think it's working for them. What were they saying about, what do you think the reasons were beyond what you've already said from a performance perspective, rather than why should you go for brand? What's the negative, or what did they come out and say, sort of what the negative was from a performance marketing perspective as to why they were dialing that down?
Well, I think if you pull it right back, I would suspect that at whatever level those conversations were happening internally, it would have been triggered by platform costs.
Yeah.
So platform costs increasing, getting less for your spend, but then the benefits of building a brand and getting an audience that have got affinity for the brand unlocks so much value in so many different areas. Being known for being the one in that space.
Yeah.
If you want to stay somewhere, Airbnb.
Yeah.
And then also, I think with the way that privacy is going, what they've done, probably ahead of the curve slightly in terms of other brands, is unlock the potential for people feeling more comfortable giving away their personal details, preferences, allowing Airbnb to use owned channels, email, app notifications to a much higher degree of efficacy. And that comes from building a brand.
Yeah. It's interesting because we're sort of saying 2 years ago as to when that came out, that they were shifting. The power of the brand, though, not the activity from a sort of marketing perspective, but the Airbnb brand 2 years ago, yes, I would say it's in a different place now, but they were the trailblazers from a brand perception and a brand sort of association, the brand in that space standpoint anyway. So it's not like they were, well, I mean, we don't know, but it's not like they were suffering in any which way. I guess, did you see it as more just let's get ahead of the curve rather than we need to shift because, apart from platform costs, for example, that we've talked about, I already thought they were a big, strong brand, whether they just preempted something or were actually reacting to something.
Well, I think they came into the industry as a disruptor, didn't they? That model was different. Cost was probably lower than if you were to book a hotel stay, for example.
Yeah.
And then I think they've matured into a brand. And then I think they've probably tasted the value of maturing into a brand, taking a step back from the budgets, which are obviously huge. It's a beast, isn't it? So seeing how they could better benefit from that budget, I think, is how they've viewed it, and the benefits that come from putting that spend against brand, or what is brand building activity, rather than performance, which can sometimes in a market like that be quite transactional. I would love to see data on brand loyalty in terms of someone that's coming in through brand, how much lifetime value that person then gives Airbnb versus someone that comes in through performance. Because I would speculate that someone coming in through a performance campaign would be less likely to return versus someone that goes through a brand campaign.
Yeah. It's an interesting space, though, that altogether, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at going away in September at the moment, and I go through all the different hoops that you'd want to go through from a research perspective. So maybe start at Airbnb, but then end up on booking.com, etc. So the concept that they've brought to market was absolutely disruptive,
But that you've just described there in itself is the very reason why you need to build a brand in that space.
Yeah, of course it is.
Because Airbnb came in as a disruptor, matured into a brand. When they matured into a brand, they were then rubbing shoulders with booking.com. They were rubbing shoulders with, like, I don't know, your direct providers, your Hiltons, all that kind of stuff. So for them to then continue growing that out, you have to build that loyalty, otherwise people aren't going to come back. People are going to start viewing Airbnb as a booking.com, and then they will pick between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we hearing it from our... I'm thinking about stepping away from travel. Is that classed as travel? Hospitality?
Yeah.
Are we hearing it? Are we seeing it elsewhere? Are Airbnb setting the precedent, really, and others are going, oh, well, if Airbnb will have a piece of that, we'll shift our budget and just see how it goes. Or if Airbnb do, it's almost like if Amazon do it from an e-com perspective, then that should be best practice. I've got a big argument against that, but that's a whole different story. Are we seeing it? Are we hearing it from others then that are exploring it? And do you think that they're exploring it because there's a big name that's gone sort of public with it a couple of years ago, and we're actually all seeing that we think the fruits of it?
I think that's a small example at scale that's validated probably quite a lot of people's thinking. In terms of what our clients are saying. I'm hearing a lot more talk around SEO being a brand channel.
Yeah.
And agencies that have been doing SEO right for the last 5+ years have been thinking about SEO as a brand channel anyway. Especially when Google moved to get rid of keyword data, things like that. And the way that SEO is done in an effective way now, you can't ignore that it is a brand activity. So I think what that's meant is conversations on bigger scale campaign activity that would fall within the specialisms of SEO is a conversation that's happening more and more and more and more.
But there's been a shift there.
I would argue, I think there's almost a light at the end of the tunnel for SEO no longer being a dirty word. I think almost, and a distant light.
Yeah, and I guess you're fortunate enough to be able to look back at how it has changed for several years. So I'm presuming you mean relatively close compared to years gone by. But if you chuck yourself back to, well, say 10 years ago, maybe between 5 and 10 years ago in SEO, would it even have ever been looked at as a brand thing or versus a performance thing? Was SEO? Because I feel like that's a new concept. That's the wrong word, but that's a new thing to be talking, a newish thing to be talking about, brand versus performance. And SEO, we're now sort of saying, is that brand building suite of activity. Like, was it ever seen as performance, really? Or I've never seen it as fitting in that way.
I think performance marketing is a fairly recent label, last 24 months probably, where it's become mainstream that performance is talked about as a thing.
Yeah.
Generally, people's understanding of performance is paid, but performance marketing is any form of marketing that has an outcome, in my opinion.
Me too, yeah.
5 years ago, 10 years ago, SEO was a transactional thing, but I think the way that SEO was perceived back then was more transactional, in that you could give an agency a budget and they would like tell you the results that you were going to get.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of achieving that were, if you knew how to, were slightly simpler and less involved than an SEO strategy now.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. It's, from a client's perspective, there's more information available on what the mechanics of SEO need to include to be successful. Plus, how it was done 5 years ago is completely different to how it needs to be done now.
Do you think clients and therefore brands see that shift, or do you think we're just closer to it as being agencies and delivering these kind of services day in, day out? Do you think it's more of an agency recognised thing, or in agency world recognised thing, that there's this brand building, SEO as a brand building sort of, as I keep saying, like a suite of activity, a programme of effort? Is that more recognised on an agency level, and therefore what I'm getting at is there needs to be that education again? I mean, we talk about it on so many episodes, the education around why and how we can sort of evidence that SEO is for brand.
Yeah, I think that has naturally happened. I think agencies have leaned into communicating it in that way a lot more. And I think if you look at innovation and technology, AI is obviously going to come up. And SEO's value is going to increase exponentially in the next 18 months because the way that the SERP is going to work is going to lean into everything that SEOs have been talking about for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So while take the weird fear mongering, it's going to take all those jobs out of it, and then you look at it from a SERP perspective and how Google are going to move to presenting information. There's going to be a move where one result has all the equity in the SERP. So it's no longer about top 3 rankings. It's you need to own that information to the level where when people are searching in the hundreds of thousands of different ways that they can, because it's a conversational search, you need to be there.
Yeah, that's quite scary to think of, though. I think it's good, but it feels very removed from where we are right now. Like, we talk about how much Google has changed. That's a fundamental change. That's a huge leap in my book. Yeah, exciting, but also I just know what alarm bells start ringing in my mind because of so many agencies. You know, I dread to think what they're going to be sort of saying and offering around that.
Yeah, I just see it as a massive opportunity for well executed SEO, and it almost just validates SEO as a channel.
Yeah.
So it becomes an easier conversation because you can quite easily communicate the mechanics of how you need to be presented just to achieve that.
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of people that lose big as well.
Do you think losing big needs to be reversed by spending big? Do you think there's going to be a increase in required investment to either get there and maintain it when you're there?
It's interesting because I think there'll be a bit of both, in terms of there will be overinvestment in SEO because the opportunity to capture that traffic at scale is going to be more niche.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, the people that lose will probably pivot into performance, which means paid will do well out of it.
True, yeah.
So it's going to be a very interesting time when that sort of starts happening.
It's the inevitable shift. But my understanding and my initial thoughts on it is increasing investment. I also think there needs to be an increase in that educational piece that we've talked about. I think you're right that agencies are closer to the sort of power, the importance of SEO from a brand perspective. But I do wonder if there's still a little bit of a deficit between agency side grasp of that and general brand, general sort of client side. So yet again, we're in the same position as saying, could do with some education around this.
Well, you're projecting on something that hasn't happened yet.
True, yeah.
And like when I'm saying Google's going to move to that, that's something that Google has said that they're going to move to, but I don't know whether the way that I've envisaged it and from the things that I've seen is actually going to transpire, but it does make a lot of sense.
They said when?
They've just said that it's sort of running in parallel
at
the moment, and they've accelerated it based on the speed in which ChatGPT and Bing have innovated, and now ChatGPT is built into every possible tool.
Absolutely everything in it.
Which is great, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's definitely where it's headed.
It'll be interesting to see that flip of budget splits.
Ultimately, you can't half-ass it anymore. If you're in a space, take Airbnb as an example, you've got to own that space at every level. You can't just build a brand, a powerhouse, and expect that then if you want to own something within that space, you can do it with scratching the surface sort of effort. You've got to go deep now. You've got to be the resource. You've got to be the depth. You've got to really own that.
So it's a good time for SEO to truly see what it can do.
And there'll be people that have been doing it right up until this point that when that shift happens, will do well out of that shift.
Yeah. And we offer SEO.